And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Today's sea ice analysis showing again a lot of sea ice-free waters here along the Arctic coast and well off the coast now. Still have this thin area of now diminishing sea ice there along near the barrier islands, and so that may go ice-free here at sometime over the next week or so. And from there, looking at today's weather, or for tonight's forecast, another front moving up Cook Inlet and into the Susitna Valley, spreading moisture into the central and mainly the central interior, not so much to the east. Areas of rain and showers to the North Gulf Coast, and that'll increase the shower activity again. And over the central and northern panhandle with less of an effect down to the south. Another weak system here bringing some rain into Kodiak. Not much wind, really not much of a factor with these two systems. But this one, wind will be a factor with this one. This should be quite a wind producer with gale and storm force winds in the forecast for the Aleutians into the Alaska Peninsula. Otherwise, areas of rain and showers, mostly cloudy skies, central and southern Alaska, panhandle, and dry up to the north. Outlook for Thursday, this low center tracks northeast to just west of Cape Newnham in the afternoon. So a good shot of rain coming into a big area of the southwest interior here, moving northward, gradually eastward. Rain and wind, gusty winds, south central Alaska, Kodiak Island, even into the Copper River Basin, some possibly gusts along the Copper River there, 40 to 50 miles an hour out of the south. And drier conditions there, but still some moisture will probably work into the Copper River Basin. Eastern interior stays dry and up to the north and northwest there to the Arctic coast, and improving over the panhandle. And for the coastal water forecast, south to southeast winds tomorrow at about 15 knots there on the south coast. Central coast, southeast to 20. East winds 20 to 25 knots Wednesday for the north coast. Lynn Canal, south at 15. Southeast 10 for Stevens Passage with Clarence Strait looking at a south wind at about 15 knots. And then for Wednesday, northwest winds 15 to 20 knots here for the south coast. Central coast, west at 20 knots, seas up to about 8 feet. And for the north coast, south to southeast winds 20 to 25 knots with seas at 9 feet. Lynn Canal, south winds 20 knots, 4-foot seas. Southeast winds at 15 for Stevens Passage, while Clarence Strait winds will be northeast at 15 or northwest at 15. For the North Gulf Coast tomorrow, light variable winds there, the whole stretch of the distance there, and southeast at 10 or southwest at 10 for Prince William Sound. Cook Inlet, light south winds at 10 knots, seas down to 2 feet. West winds east winds at 20 knots for Kamishak Bay. Southeast winds 20 knots with 5-foot seas for the Barren Islands. And looking ahead to Thursday, small craft advisories for the Barren Islands, Kamishak Bay for south-southeast winds at 30 knots. Cook Inlet, east to southeast winds 25 to 30 knots. Prince William Sound, look for winds to pick up from the southeast to 30 knots with seas up to about 6 feet, and 30 knot southeast winds for the North Gulf Coast with 8 to 10-foot seas. Tomorrow, Kodiak Island, east to southeast winds at about 20 knots, 4 to 6-foot seas there. And the Alaska Peninsula, variable winds 10 to 15 knots, kind of the calm before the storm. Southeast winds 20 knots there for Bristol Bay. And then for the day on Thursday, big increase in the winds here. Gale force winds for the Alaska Peninsula out of the southwest, 40 to 45 knots, seas as high as 25 feet. Gale warnings for Bristol Bay, south winds 35 knots, seas 10 feet. Kodiak Island, gale warnings, south winds 35 knots, seas up to 13 feet. And for the eastern Aleutians tomorrow, gale warnings coming into Unimak Island out of the northeast, 35 knots. And storm warnings here and gales for the central Aleutians, northeast 45 to 50 knots, northeast 40 to 45 knot winds here for the area about around Amchitka Island, and then north 25 from Kiska to Shemya. And the outlook for Thursday, westerlies 25 knots here right into Adak Island, about Atka eastward. We've got the gales continuing for western winds at 35 knots to Unimak Island. Unalaska Island, storm warnings. Southwesterlies 45 to 50 knots, 11 to 29-foot seas. And for the Kuskokwim Delta coast tomorrow, east winds 20 knots, Yukon Delta, northwest at 10, northwest 15 for St. Lawrence Island, but Norton Sound, winds will be south at 20 knots with 4-foot seas, northeast winds 20 knots for the Pribilofs, and north 15 for St. Matthew Island. And then for Thursday, gale warnings, Pribilof Islands, northwest 35 knots, seas 13 feet. Small craft advisories for a 30-knot wind out of the southwest for the Kuskokwim Delta coast, Yukon Delta coast, St. Lawrence Island, east winds 25 knots. And for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast tomorrow, east winds 20 knots, central and west side, east at 15. And the Chukchi Sea, basically a north wind at 10 to 15 knots with 2 to 3 foot seas. Outlook for Thursday, south winds 15 to 20 knots for the Chukchi Sea here with seas up to 3 to 4 feet. Southeast at 15 for the western Arctic coast, central coast, southeast at 10, and pretty light variable winds there for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast.